You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome. Today we have with us Brandon Allgood. He's the Chief Data Officer at Fog Pharma. He's a serial entrepreneur when it comes to leveraging machine learning for drug discovery and development. He was formerly the Chief AI Officer over at Velo Health and teaches graduate level machine learning over at Berkeley. Brandon, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Brandon, I would love to ask you about all of the opportunities that exist when it comes to machine learning and AI when it comes to drug discovery. Why is it so powerful? Why are we so excited about it?
We know more about the way the universe works than we do our own bodies. Biology is in many ways a black box. It's also, for the things we understand, it is very high dimensional and not very amenable to reductionist thinking. Obviously, we've done amazing things with the human brain. I think, and those things are generally in areas like physics and chemistry, which are amenable to reductionist thinking. Or biology, because of its nonlinear nature, is much higher dimensional, and I think we need to develop new tools in order to make advances. So I would say that's one of the reasons why I think I'm excited about machine learning in drug discovery and development, is around understanding these really high dimensional critical problems that face everyone, whether it's you or someone in your family, being able to understand the biology, to develop solutions to intervene in that biology, and to help patients both live happy and healthy lives.
Well, as a person whose grandfather and great-grandfather both died of colorectal cancer, I am very, very excited about the research that is happening here. But I did want to ask about, well, why now? Is there something about the confluence of infrastructure around the data that we're collecting, around the advances that we've made that make this particular period of time in history so exciting and opportunity rich when it comes to leveraging data science and machine learning for drug discovery?
I think biopharma is one of those places where we have, the regular reasons why machine learning is exploding, which is, I think different than what most people think it is. It's cheap CPUs and cheap storage. That is actually, if you think about Hinton's backprop algorithm, it's been around for quite a long time. Why hasn't it caught on? We didn't have the power we have today. Why didn't machine learning move faster? Could be backprop. That's at least in deep learning, but in more generally, data was harder to come upon. Now storage is cheap. We store everything, and so I think those two. But then combining that with imaging, with genomic sequencing, with understanding certain aspects of biology. I think the combination of all of those things and is really driving this. But then there's also commercial pressures, and I think there's kind of both the kind of those side, the supply side in terms of storage, CPU, and data, but then there's the demand side in that, as we as humans grow older, we are experiencing more diseases, and there's a real pressure to kind of begin to tackle those. And again, that low-hanging fruit is gone. So I think it's a confluence of many different aspects why that's kind of exploding.
Well, it feels like in the drug discovery space, there's a transition that's happening of moving more from lack of a better term, an art to science. There was we could get lucky. We could go after those low-hanging fruit, but now we need to be very systematic and apply rigor and discipline in order to get scale in terms of our efforts. But that feels like that parallels exactly what's happening on the data science realm, whereby I often talk about an artisanal model of data science, where you've got an individual data scientist who's brilliant, but who's using their own sort of homemade tools, working off in a vacuum. Eventually, through like sheer brilliance, they manage to get a model that actually gets into production, and then just stays there and is never updated. It feels like there's a connection between both the pharmaceutical industry as a whole and data science, or am I overreaching there.
There are the rare individuals in my field where they've been involved in 3 drugs that made it to market, which is
Mm.
actually
Yeah,
that's pretty rare. Or they've even been kind of led the teams that brought those drugs to market. And so those are the wizards. Whenever you have an industry like that, I think what you end up with, going back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of higher dimensional thinking, you have an individual, whether they know it or not, has the ability to ingest and do higher dimensional thinking. And I think that's a place where machine learning can really have a big impact. Your listeners that read that are kind of really into kind of the esoteric side of machine learning and data science, Gödel Escherbach, which is a great book by Hofstadter. These are strange loops where now what we're finding is we need machine learning to be able to train machine learning models. And you're actually seeing that loop now in hyperparameter optimization. We're now applying machine learning to the hyperparameter optimization problem to build the actual models. So, yeah, I think anywhere you see that kind of wizardy black hat a thing, kind of phenomenon, I think it's a good place where machine learning can have an impact. And yeah, I think it's just kind of a confluence of a number of things again, and the fact that we are kind of beginning to tackle more complex systems.
Mm. Well, I mean, arguably, this is one of those areas where it becomes harder and harder for any individual to track all of these things. So, when talking about those strange loops, thinking about this is happening on the data generation and annotation side of things, to then to the model training side of things, then to the using the model to go in and suggest potential tests that you do in the real world that you then take the data from and then go in and feed back in again. And so you have yeah, infinitely more complex processes that we had before. I'm curious about going in and doing this at scale, tracking this not just for an individual, but for teams of individual, for not just in a small number of tests, but potentially thousands, potentially tens of thousands of automated tests that you're doing. How do you go in and facilitate that?
Look at software development. Look at how, imagine the number of lines of code that went into Windows 3.11, if you remember that, or even
Oh yeah.
the modern Windows system, right? We had to learn how to build things that complex. If you would write code in a procedural way, not an object-oriented way, which many of these things were written in the beginning, how do you know that things are functioning properly? How do you, again, when you combine pieces that two individuals have written based on some spec that may not be may not be 100% accurate, how do you understand that? And I think what we did in software engineering in the beginning, we followed a very much an architecture. So civil engineering and architecture predated software engineering, and we copied that, which was very much a water flow process where kind of we designed it for years, then we built it, but now because of how fast things are moving, software kind of came into its own and built systems around agile software development, being able to build, set up systems, supporting systems, CI/CD, unit testing, APIs, this idea of these contracts between pieces of software, where you can build these extremely complex systems, and these software systems can be built by thousands of people. And video games, I think, is another good example of. I mean, if you played till the end of any of these video games, it's 10 minutes at least of people, all of the contributors, and all of them had to be coordinated to build a system that's like that. So if I think about it in that way, I think data science needs to move in that direction and become more of an engineering discipline. And I think we can learn a lot, just as kind of software borrowed from civil engineering and from other types of and electrical engineering, that data science can borrow from software engineering, but there are aspects of data science that aren't like software, and we're gonna have to develop our own things. But I think because of the way in which innovations are accelerating, we need to as a data science industry, not just within biopharma, need to be adopting standards. All data scientists should be thinking about customers, whether it's the bench scientist down the hall, or if or an actual customer outside your company. You need to be thinking about customers. You need to be thinking about, what are the decisions they're making. You need to not necessarily do what they ask for often, right? With customers, you want to understand what problem they're truly trying to solve, and to be able to build those solutions. I think we need to build infrastructure around this. So reproducibility, testing, coding standards. I think a lot of these things exist and should be integrated into data science. And that should have happened yesterday.
Oh, indeed. Well, it's striking me that when you were talking about how data scientists need to be thinking about the end user and the parallels to all software developers at the end of the day needing to be thinking about who that user is of the software. But I'm often struck by how, in the realm of software, it's usually not a question of whether or not you can build something, versus in the machine learning and AI space, it's perfectly possible that what you set out to build is just not there. There's not enough signal for it. You can't build a predictive model around it. So is there an element whereby, yes, we need to go in and learn from software development. We need to go in and build more sort of industrial scale processes for all of these things. So harden our processes and our platforms in order to get there. But is there this element whereby we need to be even more iterative? We need to be more agile than agile when it comes to data science, because at the end of the day, you don't know whether or not the data is going to support it, or whether or not the business user actually that spec was written correctly for what they thought they wanted versus what they need to.
The insights team is sitting embedded with the end user, iterating around, do we have the data to build this? Let's try this. Let's test it out. Let's validate it, right? So oftentimes in software, and this is where we need to invent kind of our own things. In software, there's a lot of companies that talk about technical readiness levels, and those technical readiness levels came from NASA. Were largely built on the system that NASA used to get us to the moon, right? And so each level has when you talk about a piece of software and its technical readiness level, there are certain aspects about its reliability, its reproducibility. And the thing is, with data science, technical readiness level means something, but you almost need another number, which I call scientific readiness level, or where it's more about validation. Has this been run? How many times has the model been run and validated? How accurate is it? Is it being updated? Have we tested? How far away from the training set have we tested it? What does that look like? So I think there's a technical readiness level and either a scientific readiness level in the case of the kind of work that I do, or more of a validation readiness level that we assign. So generally within the companies that I build, we have two numbers associated with any piece of software, and those kind of go to, how useful is it, how predictive is it being. But again, a lot of the kind of shooting into the dark is happening in that insights layer. And so you're iterating. Once you kind of got something that seems to be working, that's when you pass it down to the systems layer, and you again put more engineering rigor, put it behind an API, build monitoring, build these kind of reproducible training workflows.
Well, it's always struck me that there's a distinct lack of frameworks when it comes to data science. I mean, we had the CRISP-DM framework, but it was really much more on that insights layer. Is there anything that you're seeing which is emerging as a framework that folks can refer to when it comes to best practices for not just the insight side, but also then operationalizing and continuously monitoring and improving on a data science project?
Generally, we're inventing our own, as long as the organization has a standard and talks about standards and holds each other to standards, and is doing code reviews. Can you imagine that, like data science code reviews? That's such a rare thing, but it should be completely standard, right? Because unfortunately, especially in data science, when too many models, people have gone back and realized that there's spurious correlations in the models that's actually leading to kind of tricking the data scientists when they're building the models. For example, there's cases where in X-ray training a model to detect certain things in X-rays, which also happens to be correlated with male or female, but you don't put in male and female, but then there are shadows in the X-ray that are clearly distinguish a male from a female X-rays, and these kinds of things need to be checked and double checked. And so I think I don't know if there's a framework per se that I can point to that's open and out there, but there definitely needs to be standards, and people need to be checking those, and they need to be trained to kind of be able to hold each other accountable.
Mm. Well, when I'm thinking back to industrial scale manufacturing, one of the things that I think enabled all of this was just the simple concept of the factory, that you actually had a physical location where you had where these processes were instantiated, where you had all of the different equipment that was coming together, where you had an opportunity to go in and provide that kind of ongoing monitoring for everything that was happening. And I'm wondering whether or not there's a parallel to that on the data science side of things, that we need a quote unquote factory. We need a common. It doesn't necessarily need to be a single platform, but at least a system of systems that enables all of those individuals, that enables that process to be completed end to end, that enables visibility across that, and at the application of standardized processes. Um, I'm curious because I remember at Valo Health, one of the things that I think is always called out is just as a core to its success was the creation of a unified computational platform that everyone uses. And I'm curious, is that we talk about definitely people and processes being important, but is there this element of, well, we need to unify our systems, need to unify our platforms in order to be able to go in and apply those processes in a systematic fashion?
In a large organization, you're going to have groups that are working in R, and groups that are working in Python, and groups that are working in different languages, and that's a little harder to fight against. But certainly, within Python, for example, there are many. You can write Python in an object oriented way. You can write it in a procedural way. That's just one of the minor things that you can do that's different. And being able to standardize and being able to have those processes, whether it's in one side of in one side of your organization or the other, being able to kind of put everybody in the same place is helpful. Then be able to develop internal libraries that you kind of push, that people use, helps. And then it helps with transitioning between individuals, transitioning between different teams. It helps with onboarding. It helps with tracking, with reproducibility, with trying to look back and see what happened in this project. Well, if you've all agreed on a standard, it's much easier to kind of see that. At Valo, I think there was the unified compute, but there it was also, we were also focusing on the unifying data. So one of the things that's, I think, somewhat unique about pharma is just the number of data modalities that we're dealing with. We have small molecules, which are unique three-dimensional spatially oriented graphs. That's interesting. They have certain properties, and those properties are related to aspects of the graph, sometimes the entire graph. Then you have proteins, which are in some ways simpler than small molecules. They're bigger, but they don't have this. They don't have the same intricate connectivity structure. The difficulty thing about proteins is really is being able to understand their secondary and tertiary three-dimensional structures, and then on top of that, the dynamics. And then you have genomic information, which is related to the protein, but there's a lot of non-coding parts of the genome, and being able to understand that. There's just all these different data sets, but the thing is, they're all connected. The idea behind Valo was, if we could build it from the ground up such that it was centralized, that we had clear ontologies that we're able to connect all of these things, that we would get clear advantages out of that, being able to combine these different data sets. And there are many examples of how that ultimately ultimately did help us in our ability to build models and of all sorts, all different types, to help us from target ID all the way up through clinical work.
Mm.
So it's both a combination of the compute, but almost more so just data model.
Oh, indeed. Well, it strikes me it's not just multiple modalities; it's also the unstructured or semi-structured nature of those different modalities combined with incredible data volumes around this. So, on the one hand, it's wonderful because you've got such a target-rich environment. You've got all of this variation that you should be able to capture signal across all of these. On the other hand, you've got a massive space that you now need to go and search across of and go and integrate across all of those. Um, uh, Curious when it comes to going after these. You mentioned proteins, and when I talk to folks in the biopharma space who are leveraging machine learning, almost always they tend to focus in on proteins, and often specifically in peptides. Is there something about the nature of proteins and peptides? Is it not just obviously because they are so incredibly useful for treatment, different treatments, but is there something about the nature of that problem that makes it amenable to machine learning methods, or why all of the excitement?
So proteins are in some ways easier to deal with than small molecules, in that proteins at the base is a linear structure, unlike small molecules, which are these very complex, can be very complex interconnected graph structures. And the essentially the vocabulary, the corpus of proteins is 20 natural amino acids. And so I think it lends itself well to connecting function and protein sequence. You see a lot of work there. I think with AlphaFold 2 coming out, and that the solution there in being able to predict secondary and tertiary structures of those proteins, that's really opened up a whole new field and ability to design custom proteins, design antibodies. Um, so I think there's been a number of different breakthroughs there. I think small molecules are still a very hard problem to crack. Generative work there often results in unsynthesizable compounds, unrealizable compounds, and and the there's still a lot of things like off-target activity that small molecules suffer from that proteins don't. Protein therapeutics suffer from immune responses, which can be negative, and that can be tough. But I think off-target toxicities related to small molecules is even a more complex problem. So weirdly enough, even though we've been at small molecule drug discovery for longer, I almost think that proteins are in many ways easier and more amenable to machine learning approaches.
Interesting. I mean, you mentioned generative AI, and I hear more and more folks not mention large language models per se, but they talk about the use of transformers as a way of going in and getting to new potential synthetic proteins. And they usually are talking about taking a transformer and then fine tuning the living daylights out of it with molecular data. um, and you mentioned also like the vocabulary of the defined vocabulary of proteins. Is there um, something to the fact that these transformer models are particularly effective against this class of problems? And should we be thinking about them differently from large language models?
So with transformers, you have this self attention mechanism, and the ability for, as you're training the model, the ability for these transformers to understand if you're given, for example, a certain a certain amino acid and a set of amino acids around that particular amino acid, kind of where it needs to pay attention in order to predict secondary and tertiary structure. And so I think, before that, early work in protein structure prediction, you had a set context window if you're using, for example, LSTMs, and even with attention functions that are, but you always had this kind of fixed context window. But it was clear that that context window, unless it was the entire protein, was not always going to give you the right context, because you can have parts of a protein, two amino acids that are separated by a huge distance, actually affecting the structure they're in, by the fact that these things can fold back on themselves and construct this. And with attention functions, you can get that context, and it's learning it at the same time. Oftentimes in proteins, you are predicting function, and you can build these foundational models. In large language models, it's different in some ways, except we're not trying to predict anything three-dimensional. We're trying to build out more of a thought construct in its ability to generate language and responses. So I think there's some parallels, but I don't see. I mean, I don't see huge parallels between them.
Well, I mean, it does sound like there are two different approaches that you should be thinking of when you're thinking of quote unquote generative AI and lumping in transformers in there. That if you are looking at going in and using this on molecular data and proposing potentially new structures, you're probably thinking about fine tuning your own transformer models in order to go after that. Versus if you're thinking of leveraging something that looks a little bit more like a GPT-4, presumably you're going after entirely different use cases where you're looking to augment a researcher to help them go in and find and synthesize uh, content versus hoping to bridge that gap.
Yeah. So again, it depends on what you're thinking about in terms of generative models in proteins. Certainly, you're going to want to fine tune them just like you would. So again, the underlying assumption of all machine learning models is that your test set is your test set distribution is essentially looks like your training set distribution. And so, if, for example, AlphaFold 2 is trained on all proteins in the PDB, and for those people that understand, that have gone into that algorithm, it actually uses it's not fully generative in that it actually uses a reference library, which is one of the reasons why it's such a big thing to run. It uses a reference library of structures and borrows from that. And so, yeah, if you are looking for a particular function or looking at going in a particular direction that's obviously a different distribution than all proteins, then you are going to need to fine tune it in the same way as with large language models, and having it applied, for example, to biopharma data sets. Again, words that we use on a daily basis within biopharma are rarely used in general language, and again, so they're going to be underrepresented in the training set.
Well, the very fact that they transfer at all, I think, seems like black magic to most of us. That there is any similarities in the underlying patterns.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a lot of scientific literature or a lot of scientific concepts on the internet, so there is some of that for sure.
Curious in terms of either treatments that you're particularly excited about that you think are going to come about very heavily because of machine learning, or indeed ones that we should be looking at as templates, as best as examples that we should learn from of drugs that are already out there, but also in terms of new ones that we should be keeping our eyes out for.
Yeah, I mean, again, there are a lot of different aspects. So, I mean, I will answer your question, but I'm going to answer a different question. There's no such thing as an AI drug. This concept needs to be killed, and I've been dealing with it for 20 years. The questions are, well, when is the first AI designed drug going to exist? We've been using machine learning. I mean, if you talk to the crusty comp chemists, they've been using machine learning, albeit, random forest, some of the earlier methods since the 80s. And those have been involved in decision making in drug discovery since then. So you could say, many drugs that we're taking today are AI enabled. But, I would say in the modern sense, right now we've got a number of different drugs that are in phase 2 that are, I would say, that are more enabled, both in terms of target identification, as well as their properties and their structure, and these are drugs that I think might have been more difficult to come up with in traditional using traditional routes. So there's no one in particular that I would think about. But one of the things I think about is AI and its ability to unlock certain areas of drug development. And the one that I'm involved with and am biased on are peptides. And so here with synthetic peptides, you're going beyond that 20 amino acids to thousands of non-natural amino acids. We're able to generate both D and L peptides, so helical peptides with different chirality than is typically found in the body. And so with this large design space and a lot of unknowns about that combination, we could go the traditional route that we've done with small molecules and with other things where we just try and fail a million times till we finally get it right, or we can really start to accelerate it. And there's no reason why we wouldn't immediately use the tools that we have. And the nice thing is, because these new therapies, these new therapeutic modalities are not entrenched in kind of a tradition or a traditional way of thinking about them, I think it's opportune to be able to pick up and employ machine learning from the beginning. And so I think that's where I think the biggest advantage is going to come out with a combination of machine learning and these new modalities.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked about certain best practices that are involved here and that are involved in getting these stage two clinical trials. But in terms of what they are, it sounds like some of them are regarding the application of industrial standardized processes, best practices when it comes to just the data science process on the insight side, as well as on the then operationalizing side of things. Are there other ones that you would call out as being the drivers of success here?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I often see and have seen over the last 20 years is not everyone sees the benefit of employing data science and machine learning. Many people do, but again, many people think of it as, how do I speed up my existing process? How do I get that much faster, that much cheaper in this one piece? The whole process is still overall the same, and you're just deploying machine learning in these little local areas. Where I think the biggest change and the biggest effect is going to have is being able to step back and say, well, wait, with AI, how do I change the whole process? Do I have to do it this way? Do I have to think about it this way? Because I think that's where you're going to get the biggest wins, is by being able to actually question the entirety of the process that you're working on or you're looking at. And the question becomes, if machine learning models are in the design process, you should ask, well, is making this molecule with this schmethyl and this ethyl, like, what's the information content? Like, say I make both of those compounds and I test them and they come back. Are they different enough in that was it worth making both of them? Is it truly in terms of information content for the next model? Everybody's thinking the next molecule could be the drug. In reality, the next one is never the drug, right? And so really you should be thinking about, what molecules should we make next that are most informative in the next round of modeling? And so it's really about information content and about making the models better, such that now once you have a really good model around a particular property, or you're feeding it into a generative model, then you make one or two steps and you're at the drug. But you make far fewer molecules and you actually perform far fewer design make test cycles.
Well, it sounds like not just taking an active learning approach, but making active learning the foundation, the core of the process. In terms of being able to get to such a thing, it doesn't strike me that many companies are just going to iterate their way until they happen to have developed an active learning-based drug discovery process. It feels like this is more foundational, systemic. Is there a trick to it? You're looking at getting leadership in who understands this, who does this? Is there, like, you get in a principal data scientist who's done this previously and they're able to go and lay this out, or how does this come about?
Yeah, this is the traditional innovator's dilemma. There are many books written on this. I think
Clay Christensen is back.
exactly. Well, you for a time, once you implement that for a time, it's going to seem less efficient. It's going to go slower. It's not going to be as powerful. It won't seem as powerful. But we know due to the efficiencies and the change and the ability of machine learning and things to scale, we know for a fact that it will ultimately be, more powerful, faster doing that. And so I think in order to implement it, it comes with a whole host of changes from an executive level down to an operator level. I think it's a holistic change, which is why what you find right now is, yes, bigger pharma companies are implementing solutions, but they're not truly, they're doing this more of the spot solution piece, where the smaller companies that don't have a lot of this legacy, that they can innovate, and they will become, that we're starting to see some of them IPO. We're starting to see bigger deals between big pharma and these smaller innovative companies. And I think it's through that process, through that infection process of the larger companies, or through some of these actually becoming larger companies, right? The next Genentechs are going to come out of this cohort of AI-enabled drug discovery and development companies. And I think only through that process are we going to really see this change happening. I mean, it is one for one innovator's dilemma.
If for all of our listeners, if they're not familiar with it, I do highly recommend going back to Clay Christensen's Innovator's Solution. It wasn't, I don't think he ever intended it to be applicable in the realm of drug discovery, but I'm always amazed at just how relevant it is to the change management problems that we face in pretty much every industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty universal. It's proven to be so.
Indeed.
Just that and just in another one is the Mythical Man Month.
Oh,
another great book, and another one that seems to be universally applicable as well.
Indeed. Well, Brandon, thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts and insights. If folks want to get in touch with you, should they reach out on LinkedIn, or are there other ways in which they can find out more about what you're doing? And
yeah, right now, I think, again, I started at FOG about 3 months ago, so I'm very much heads down focused there. I would say LinkedIn for now, but as I start to get that under my feet, I will start writing again. So I've written a piece for Timmerman Report. If people, it's more of an industry rag for the biopharma industry, but certainly want to be doing more writing for Timmerman Report and other outlets. So yeah, I would say stay tuned to LinkedIn. That's where I'm gonna kind of be able to show off my work.
Wonderful. Brandon, thank you very much for joining us on the Data Science Leaders podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.